You come across the badger with the donut you desire. Nighty Night Badger does a 16 hit. A 16 does not hit. I must have forgotten what is the AC of a badger. There we go. Does a 22 hit. Close, but no. What? How's that possible? Anything else you would like to do? No. Very well. It's the badger's turn. Ooh, does a 35 hit. Oh wait, you're serious? Alright, here comes the damage. 235 points of slashing damage later, the badger runs up, ripping off both of your legs in one claw attack. You're dead, aren't you? Yeah, I think just a little. Man, I knew this encounter had TPK potential.
Welcome to SquidPublic. Slay the like button, subscribe for more content, join Patreon for one-shots and other content, as well if you liked the video, leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching.
Balancing a monster in D&D can be quite difficult, so we'll talk about which aspects we can do today, and part 2, we'll talk about the actual calculations and all that. So the first video will have a few calculations and what you can do to make a monster stronger or weaker, and then part 2 will actually say how do we balance for a party of 5 at level 4 or something like that. As we discussed, what makes a monster harder or easier? I believe there's about 8 categories that you can talk about that increases a monster's difficulty or decreases it. The following are AC, HP, resistances/evasion, chance to hit, multi-attack, brute, DC saves, and legendary actions/layer actions. These things can be done with any monster and any monster stat really. I ran a campaign where cultists were my main enemy, and they get easily outleveled past level 3 of the party. Therefore, I'd obviously increase their HP at level 3, 5, 7, and 9 to keep up the difficulty of my party, but still have the same quote-unquote cultist base to them. We'll review what I had them on in part 2. For now, we're going to talk about everything I could have done to them to make them stronger, harder, or obviously easier if I ever needed to back them down. AC. AC is an obvious one. Pretty much look at it either way. When you decrease by an AC or increase by an AC, it's a 5% chance swing. It's not exactly like that, but it pretty much is. Obviously, if you have plus 20 to hit, you could look at it, you have a 175% chance to hit, therefore you would have to increase the monster's AC by like, let's just say 25 off the top of my head to actually get it below 100%. That way, every 1 AC down or 1 C up is technically 5%, but if you count 100% as 100%, sometimes adding 1 AC will technically not get you out of 100%. And just some quick calculations here about how AC can quote-unquote make a monster harder/live longer. We'll do this example. If a hero has plus 7 to hit and the monster's AC is 10, that's a 90% chance to hit, as only 1 and 2 will be the only numbers in which the hero will miss. Obviously, everything's technically a 95%, as a natural 1 will always ruin you, unless you're halfling, then you can maybe do like 98, 99%, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Just in the generic world where a natural 1 is a failure and you can't re-roll, it's a 95% chance to hit. Now, if we increase the AC from 10 to 15, but keep that plus 7, we're now at only a 65% hit rate, as 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 are now all available die rolls for you to miss. If we were to do some generic calculations, just say you do 1 damage per hit and we roll 100 times, in the first scenario, you would do 95 damage. Second scenario, you would only do 65 damage. That's 30 damage less just by increasing AC by 5. HP is kinda like AC, but maybe in reverse. Maybe you expect to get a hit a lot, so if you figure your party's gonna hit all the time, you just give your monster twice the amount of HP, and it should theoretically last twice as long. Not always the case, and we're going to talk about this why. Sometimes it can get bursted down quicker than you think, and other times increasing the twice amount of HP could actually mean maybe a party wipe. Because the more HP you give, like you said, the more rounds it can survive, and if it's a heavy hitting monster, if you knock down one player or force your party to start healing, your damage calculations per round may start going out the window. If people are not attacking and trying to reduce this monster's damage by healing, your damage numbers are essentially amplified because now this monster will be living longer and your heroes will not be doing as much damage to it. So be careful about how much HP you give. This is how I often do my newly balanced monsters if I'm not sure about them. If it's a session of new monsters, and especially if it's a big level upgrade such as you hit level 7 or 9, you get a new access to spells, I sometimes have 2 HPs. I have the HP I want to give, and then I have maybe a secondary HP where I'm thinking if things go wrong and I did make the monsters too hard, we'll calculate all the monsters based off of this HP. I usually use the lower HP first, and if I notice my heroes are burning through that easily, I will then go to the second HP, which is higher, and then I will use that higher HP in my next fights to come, as it is the properly balanced HP. The great thing about being a DM is you can bend the rules. Traditionally, your attack modifiers are obviously your main attribute plus your proficiency. So if you have 18 in strength, it's a +4. And then let's just say you get a +3 to proficiency, your plus to hit would be +7, your damage would be +4 if it was a strength-based melee weapon. That's the traditional rules. However, as the DM, if you think the AC is fair, if you think the attributes are fair, you just want to give your monsters maybe a +1 to hit and +1 to damage or a +2, whatever you want, do it. There's nowhere in the rules that say you don't. And if a player calls you out saying, hey, wait a second, what's their strength? You just did like an added 6 to damage. I don't know how to really ever figure that out unless you told them. But if they call you out on that, you just say, it's just how the monster is. And if they can't accept that, well, they can't really accept you being a DM, to be honest. And I've always found it's a lot easier to modify the damage and chance to hit without increasing attributes. And here's why I'll say it's very dangerous to increase attributes. Attributes affect saving throws, skill checks, which are huge in fights. Therefore, let's just say you wanted to give a +7 damage and it was dex based. You're like, okay, so we'll pop it up to +7. Well, now the enemy stealth check is a minimal +7. Their dexterity saving throw is a minimum +7. So that can be pretty brutal depending where you're fighting. So let's say the original monster only had like a +3 or +4, and you're like, well, it's not really going to damage my heroes too much, so I just want to make their dex to a certain point where I can add +7. You're obviously going to have to apply that skill check anywhere else you go. So if you get fireballed or any other dexterity check, you now have a +7 to that. And if they were already proficient in saving throws, now they could easily be a +9 to +10, which is a massive saving throw. So I would avoid increasing main attributes unless you're really ready to make that monster a heavy hitter. Multi-attack. Sometimes 2, 3, 4, or even 5 attacks are definitely better than 1. With multi-attack, sometimes there's no real need to increase damage, increase chance to hit, increase AC, or anything. Sometimes just adding 1 attack alone will obviously almost double the output of your monsters and make a monster maybe not so threatening, now the central target, especially if they get above 2 attacks. We'll talk about this one a little more later. It's a very short section, but if a monster has just 1 attack, consider giving them 2 attacks. And if it's a beast, maybe consider giving them 2 claw attacks and 1 bite attack rather than 1 bite and 1 claw. That could easily make a beast monster feel a little more realistic and also output their DPS. Let's just say you have 1 big monster and they only do 1 big hit. The best you could do is always knock down 1 person, they pop up and heal and stuff. But with a multi-attack, you would obviously do a lot of damage and actually threaten your party for a serious TPK. Brute. I like Brute a lot because it's a really cheap, easy way to do more damage and get some big criticals in there as well. If you're ever worried about your party members finding out that you're adding random attributes or stuff that maybe doesn't make sense, don't worry. They're really not going to know. They might obviously feel the damage increase, and if they ask how, just say that's how the monster is. It's not really any of their business to figure out how they're doing it or what mechanic you're using, as long as you're generally following rules that are agreed upon in your party or exist in the rulebook already. Brute also allows you to not do an insane amount of multi-attacks, and that's really good as well. Brute does your damage quickly and within a time frame. For example, let's say we're to do 2d8 per hit with Brute, and they get a multi-attack. Let's just say that's just generically possible 4 d8s of damage they could roll. You could counter, well, what happens if we just gave them 4 multi-attacks, 1d8 each, the +4? Theoretically, at the end of the day, that could actually do more damage if the dice were to always max. However, here's my problem with 4 attacks and multi-attack. A, it's a lot to keep track of. B, multi-attacks mean you can actually share the load more, which means your tanks may not actually be able to tank as much as you may feel bad sending 4 attacks at 1 person, which would be the same attribute to a Brute. C, more rolls, more critical chances, which means you could actually just roll more criticals and start getting better chances to reduce your party members' HP faster. And D, if someone goes down and you still have 3 attacks left, you may feel propelled to just stab them another 3 times on the ground, whereas Brute may only knock them down once, and then the next damage would only do a death blow or 2. Therefore, multi-attacks actually can be a little more deadly in certain situations than just rolling more dice in one damage hit. Because if you have a 50% chance to hit, you could hit once with Brute and miss with the other, but if you have like 5 or 6 attacks, you could land 3 attacks, which could matter at the end of the day. As I said, the only real unfortunate event Brute does bring is immediate death doors checks. If you do have something like 3d12s rolling, because that's technically what Brute makes it now, and you roll like 30 and you double that to 60, I mean, that could be an immediate death door, and then you could be in some serious trouble. So Brute's not a perfect solution, but I tend to like it for your lower level guys, because 2d6s or 2d8s don't often do a horrible amount of damage, but it's respectable enough that it actually makes them a threat. Resistances. This one could get lengthy, but for this video we're going to generalize it. You could easily make a monster twice as durable if you make them resistant to non-magical weapons. Now if your party has magical weapons, kind of a waste to be honest. There's probably not many scenarios in which they would get attacked by non-magical. And then other things you could look at is resistances to obviously fire, poison, cold, whatever, all of that damage. Therefore, if you have someone who picked all fire spells, next thing you know, you're already resisting half of it, and we'll talk about kind of the next area of resistances, but not right away here. Also, obviously, the vice versa of this is, well, you can make things vulnerable. Let's say you have a high HP based enemy, and the player's like, oh, I know, player's metagame, obviously. They go, oh, I know the stat block on this guy is 150. It's like, well, he's really weak to slashing damage, like, really weak. Now, suddenly, your 1d8 plus 4 is now always a critical, and then obviously, if you critical, more and more dice, more and more damage, and your party goes, oh, okay, like, I thought you were kind of screwing us there. So obviously, you can make a bigger HP enemy weaker with vulnerabilities, make smaller HP enemies with resistances last a little longer. Evasion. This is somewhat a resistance area, but obviously it's more in the dex area. But it does allow some creatures to be a little tougher, as dexterity checks are pretty common among spells, and can obviously nullify your spellcasters pretty bad if they're more of the gunslingers and dexterity saving check slingers such as Fireball. So let's combine a situation here. Let's say you already gave your enemies fire resistance and evasion. That's pretty cruel for Fireball, and we'll talk about why here. So obviously your wizard or whoever is casting Fireball, that's their MO, you know, they just always cast Fireball. First turn, no matter what, they want to feel it out. Let's just say they do that and they roll like a 32, and you're like, alright, well all my people pass, no one takes damage. That wizard's like, oh, level 3 Fireball, down the drain, 0 damage on 4 people, got it. Not a great scenario, instantly increases the survivability and deadliness of your creatures. Let's say they do hit, and let's say you're calculating like 80 to 100 damage on these guys, and your wizard rolls a 30 points of Fireball damage on 4 characters. That would be naturally 120. However, with evasion and fire resistance, the fire resistance would knock it down to 60, and on a failed save, you take another half, 30. Now that's 30 total damage. That's not 30 damage among each creature. So each creature would reduce it to 15 and then to 7. 7 points of damage for a level 3 spell is pretty much worse than a single attack from a melee hero at that point. Therefore, you really need to think about what resistances and evasions you give, as your monsters could be a headache in your party, especially if you know they love to pick those dexterity saving throw spells. DC/saving throws. Spell DC is obviously crucial for some monsters, maybe not so much for others, but it really does affect the general hardness/easiness of a monster. A common example of this would be a Medusa or a Basilisk. Obviously their ability to turn people to stone is really their main gimmick, therefore jacking up their spell DC could usually mean instant TPK, or reducing it so much would make people not even care about the DC in general. It's a very precise balance. And once again, all of your calculations could go out the window if you made the DC too hard and no one can save, and if no one can ever open their eyes or directly look at the creature, your average damage per round could also tank. Therefore, they may not be turning to stone, but man, are they missing your Basilisk because you also made their AC too high because you were thinking they might roll straight rather than at disadvantage. I rarely mess around with spell DC, as once again, we go back to the AC fallacy here where 1 up is 5%, 1 down is 5%, and spell DCs are one of those things that don't really get better from the beginning of the game for most people. Therefore, I've found the book is usually pretty good about their spell DC. Unless it's a really, really low-level monster, such as Basilisks are only challenge 3, and their DC is only 12 for their constitution check on the gaze. At level 9, that's going to be relatively bad for only a DC of 12. At that point, you could easily have characters getting +8s to saving throws, which means you only have about an 80% or 75% chance for them to fail once. The players may just keep their eyes open and obviously burst through that in one turn, as if you keep the same amount of HP and AC, that Basilisk is not going to make it past round 1. So how would we make this monster harder? If you had level 9s, I would recommend an AC of around 14 to 15. 2 to 3 is a pretty big deal, because now we're taking, that 70-80% chance more to about maybe a 65-70, which is a pretty big deal. And especially for your squishy people who don't have the con saves, they're pretty much determined to just now close their eyes the whole fight, because that Basilisk is bad, it's got a strong gaze, and only your real beefy people should be even attempting to open their eyes to look at it. If I was a DM, I would personally put it at 14. It's just a little bit on the safer side, and I think it would still deter a lot of your lower people from obviously trying to look at it. And it might be just high enough that even your big melee people with +8 to con might not feel lucky enough to survive multiple rounds of the gaze. Therefore, I'd pick 18. So going from challenge 3 up to level 9s, I only increased the DC by 2, because I think anything above 15, or even right at 15, starts getting really hard and could easily throw the fight out of your favor. One more comment on spell DC. DCs on spells can also be really brutal, because there are certain spells where if you make the DC really high and you roll on one of their lower checks, let's just say you do like an int or wisdom, and let's just say it's like a hypnotic pattern or a feeble mind, something like that. You could pretty much just insta-screw someone. You might be saying, oh, it's only a DC of 16, you're all level 11. Yeah, and that could be really bad and game over for certain people. Now, obviously, you do have to balance and say, well, you know what? It would only be smart to go after a low-end person with feeble mind, because obviously that intelligence score is going to ruin you. But I wouldn't jerk and pull the trigger and be like, well, my playable characters have 17 and 18 as their DC. I'm going to make my guy have 18 right away. It's like, okay, well, calm down there and understand the ramification of that, because not everyone's going to roll as well as monsters. Monsters can pretty much break stat blocks and you can modify them a lot more. Your party has stuck the rules, and therefore they may not be able to get +13 on con checks right away. So even though your players might have a 19 DC save, your monster might have a +14 while they're rocking like a +8 or 9 at that point. So keep that in your head when you're making DCs for your enemies. Finally, legendary actions / layer actions. Layer actions can be quite fun, as they can add difficulty in different ways, making the ground difficult terrain, which means they can't run up on the monster right away. You can do damage even though the monster's not near someone by having lava or vines grab someone and having their thorns sink into their calf. Layer actions, there's a bunch in the book. There's some for certain styles of monsters. Pull certain ones you like. They can make one monster fights feel rather unique, as there's a layer or at least control with the monster in there, and it can be a pretty memorable experience if you pull it out once in a while. I wouldn't make obviously every monster that's not big or story related have layer actions, but it can be a nice touch. And the legendary actions. Legendary actions open up a can of worms that can make a monster beyond brutal, or even just downright deadly. Legendary actions often include more attacks, disengaging, or just status effects or healing. This can knock people prone on their turn, it can knock them on death's door on their turn, it can disengage losing advantage. There's a lot legendary actions allow you to do, even though it may be a respectable amount of HP and damage for when it's just on its turn, but you do have to remember that legendary actions essentially can give up to about 2 more turns, if not 3 at the most. Therefore, you have a multi-attack of 2 hoof attacks, let's just say, but you have 3 legendary action points that can do 3 more hoofs attacks. You should just consider your monster having the potential to do 5 hoof attacks in one turn, and maybe calculate the damage that way. A good monster for an example of how to build up a monster but keep it at a respectable level is the unicorn in the monster manual. The unicorn's only a challenge 5, but it has a lot of other aspects that makes it last a while and very unique compared to other level 5s, 4s, and 3s. The unicorn is a very low level that has legendary actions, certain resistances and all of that, and can be a quite formidable foe. In part 2, as I said, we'll talk about how I made my cultists stronger and stronger each level, and how I kind of calculated everything. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got some ideas from some of these that you may have forgotten about, to make your monsters bigger and badder, or to make them more frail and weak. Thank you for watching.